don't know who else is alive.
I know, ma'am. Just stay on the phone with me, okay?
My whole family, there's 30 people, 25 people.
I know.
Please come immediately.
Who's in your house?
Immediately.
That call came in at 11:37 p.m. on Christmas Eve 2008. Within minutes, every phone line at Covina Dispatch would light up with panicked reports from East Nallrest Drive. But by the time first responders arrived at the Ortega family home, flames had already consumed most of the structure. What investigators would discover in the ashes would reveal a level of planning so meticulous, a betrayal so calculated, that even veteran detectives struggled to comprehend how a man dressed as Santa could systematically destroy an entire family during what should have been their most joyful celebration of the year.
It was never like this. I am shocked. I would never picture in my right mind he would ever do something to a family. I'm just devastated.
Before we examine this devastating case that forever changed how one community views Christmas, please consider subscribing to help these important stories reach more people who need to remember the victims whose voices were silenced too soon. Covina, California sits 22 miles east of Los Angeles, tucked beneath the San Gabriel Mountains. In 2008, its population of 45,000 knew it as a quiet place, where serious crime rarely touched their tree-lined streets. The Ortega family had called East Nallrest Drive home for decades. Joseph Ortega, 79, and his wife Alicia, 70, had raised 5 children in that house. By Christmas Eve, their family had grown to include spouses and 17 grandchildren. Every morning, Alicia walked her 2 dogs through the neighborhood. Joseph tended his garden. Neighbors later described them as the kind of people who made you feel like family the moment you met them. Their oldest son, James, 52, worked in construction. He'd married Teresa, 51, and they'd built a stable life together. Charles, 50, had found happiness with his wife Cherie, 45. The daughters, Letitia, Alicia, and Sylvia, each had their own families, their own stories. But it was Sylvia's story that would intersect with unimaginable violence. At 43, Sylvia Ortega Partardo was rebuilding her life. Her divorce from Bruce Jeffrey Partardo had been finalized exactly 1 week earlier, December 18th. The marriage had lasted less than 2 years, but the deception went back much further. They'd met in 2004 at church. Bruce appeared ideal, an aerospace engineer at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, a church usher, no criminal record. They married in January 2006. The problems started immediately. Bruce refused to open joint bank accounts, refused to help support Sylvia's 3 children from a previous relationship. "They're your responsibility," he told her, despite earning $90,000 annually. But the worst revelation came months later. Bruce had a son, Matthew, a 13-month-old who'd suffered catastrophic brain damage in 2001 while in Bruce's care and apparent drowning that left the child unable to walk, talk, or care for himself. Bruce collected a $100,000 insurance settlement, then vanished from Matthew's life completely. Never visited, never paid support. Yet every year he claimed the disabled child as a tax deduction. When Sylvia discovered this, she understood. When she opened it, she saw what appeared to be Santa Claus, red suit, white beard, carrying a large present. "Santa Claus! Santa Claus!" she exclaimed. Without speaking, Bruce drew a handgun and shot Katrina in the face. Letitia would later tell investigators she heard the shot from the dining room, saw her daughter stagger backward, blood streaming down her cheek. Before anyone could process what was happening, Bruce stepped through the doorway, began firing into the crowd. Everyone started panicking, Letitia recalled in her 911 call. "We all dove under the dining room table. Charles Ortega tried to rush the shooter. Bruce shot him multiple times. James attempted to shield his wife Teresa. Both fell under the gunfire. Alicia Ortega, the 70-year-old matriarch, tried to protect her grandchildren. Bruce showed no hesitation. Some victims tried to fight back even after being wounded. A relative later told reporters, even bloodied, they stood up. They tried to grab him to stop him, but they couldn't. People fled in every direction, through doors, through windows. A 16-year-old girl jumped from a second-story window, breaking her ankle on impact. A young mother shielded her baby as she crawled beneath furniture. Letitia saw her injured daughter escape through the front door and made her own break for safety. The shooting lasted approximately 3 minutes, 180 seconds of methodical violence. Then, as the last gunshot echo died, Bruce sat down his empty weapons and turned to the silver-wrapped package he'd carefully placed by the door. The gift looked festive enough, 3 feet tall, wrapped in metallic paper, topped with an oversized red velvet bow. Party guests who'd survived the initial attack, hiding behind furniture or playing dead on the floor, watched in confusion as the man in the Santa suit began unwrapping his own present. Inside was Bruce's masterpiece of destruction, a commercial air compressor he'd purchased in August, methodically modified in his garage over 4 months. He'd replaced the standard nozzle with a high-pressure racing fuel injector, reinforced the tank to hold 18 gallons instead of the standard 5, tested it in the Mojave Desert, where he'd filmed himself spraying fuel streams 40 feet long. Bruce hefted the 70-pound device and began his second phase. He moved through the first floor systematically, spraying racing fuel across walls, furniture, carpet. The aerosol mist hung in the air like toxic fog. Witnesses hiding outside later described the smell. Sharp, chemical, overwhelming even from across the lawn. His plan called for controlled ignition using a flare. Bruce had practiced this too, timing how long fuel vapors took to reach optimal concentration. But in a house lit for Christmas, with candles on the mantel and a pilot light burning in the kitchen stove, physics intervened. The explosion came at 11:34 p.m. The blast, "I need a bandage, please. I don't know who else is alive." I know, ma'am. Just stay on the phone with me." "Okay, my lost family. There's 25 people. I know. By 11:37, all 6 emergency lines at Covina Dispatch were simultaneously active. Callers reported different pieces of the same nightmare: explosions, automatic gunfire, a massive structure fire, children jumping from windows, a burning figure in a Santa suit stumbling down the street. Lieutenant James Buchanan arrived first. His later testimony captured the scene. "When I pulled up, it looked like the apocalypse. Fire was shooting 30 feet above the roofline. The heat was so intense we couldn't get within 50 feet of the structure. And the screaming, neighbors screaming about people trapped inside, survivors screaming for help, sirens screaming from every direction." Inside that inferno, 9 members of the Ortega family were beyond help. Some had died from gunshots before the fire reached them. Others succumbed to smoke inhalation as flames consumed the first floor. The heat grew so intense it melted copper pipes, incinerated wooden beams to ash, and destroyed the dental records that would normally identify victims. Fire crews battled the blaze for 8 hours. They poured 40,000 gallons of water onto the structure. But for the Ortega family trapped inside, those efforts came far too late. Joseph and Alicia Ortega, their sons James and Charles, James' wife Teresa, Charles's wife, Sherry, their daughter, Alicia Ortiz, Alicia's 17-year-old son, Michael, and Sylvia, Bruce's ex-wife, his primary target, all shot before the fire consumed them. When police and fire crews arrived just before midnight, the house on the quiet cul-de-sac was engulfed in flames. Police responding to frantic 911 calls found people running for their lives and heard descriptions of the nightmare inside. They were told that a person had come to the house dressed in a Santa Claus outfit and upon entering the house had opened fire on the persons attending a Christmas Eve celebration. On first look, inspectors reported finding 3 charred corpses. In daylight, 3 more bodies were found. Investigators would later find that he set up several rental cars across different parts of Los Angeles, like pieces on a chessboard. One of those cars was parked close to his ex-wife's divorce lawyer's home, which led detectives to believe the attorney might have been a secondary target he never got the chance to reach. Inside that vehicle were road maps stretching across the Southwest all the way down to Mexico, along with enough basic supplies to support someone traveling for days without stopping. He even booked a plane ticket out of LAX to Moline, Illinois, scheduled for early Christmas morning. To anyone who asked, he said he would be spending the holidays in Iowa with family. To support that lie, he wrapped $17,000 in cash around his body, sealing it under layers of plastic. Detectives quickly realized that the car wasn't just packed with supplies, it was rigged to explode. Bruce had created a booby trap so precise that the bomb would detonate the moment anyone attempted to remove the Santa suit. It was a final act of violence he designed to unleash even after he was gone. The bomb squad spent hours examining the setup before safely triggering a controlled detonation, confirming that the mechanism wasn't amateur work. It required planning, patience, and a clear intent to cause as much destruction as possible. At approximately 1:30 in the morning, alone in his brother's quiet house, Bruce Jeffrey Partredieu reached the end of his plan. Severely burned, exhausted, and knowing escape was no longer possible, he placed a 9mm handgun into his mouth and pulled the trigger. When Brad Partredieu arrived home around 3 a.m., expecting to return from a Christmas party to peace and silence, he instead walked into a nightmare. Bruce's body was lying on the floor in a pool of blood. Nearby, detectives later found a second handgun. A bullet hole punched into the ceiling suggested Bruce might have fired a test shot first, either by accident, out of hesitation, or as a final moment of panic, before turning the weapon on himself. The autopsy report deepened the mystery around his state of mind. Examiners found cocaine in Bruce's system, which may explain how he managed to keep moving despite suffering burns so severe most people would have collapsed. But the drugs did nothing to explain the months of planning, the detailed preparation, or the decision to annihilate an entire family simply because a marriage had ended. His physical pain might have driven his final moments, but the destruction he caused was the result of choices he made long before Christmas Eve. For anyone who follows true crime, or for storytellers like us who've covered hundreds of cases, this is one of those stories that lingers long after you close the file. It's the type of case that forces you to confront how little we sometimes know about the people living right beside us. Bruce Partredieu wasn't the kind of man neighbors whispered about or avoided. He was the unemployed aerospace engineer who still showed up every Sunday to volunteer as a church usher. The quiet guy who walked his dog at the same hour each morning, offering polite nods and friendly waves. On the outside, he looked stable, helpful, harmless. But behind that calm exterior, resentment was piling up like pressure inside a sealed container. In the years that followed, the house on East Knoll Rest Drive, once the center of the Ortega family's holiday traditions, could no longer remain standing. It was demolished, erased from the neighborhood like a wound too deep to ignore. Today, the lot is a quiet patch of grass, an empty space that holds the weight of everything that happened there. Children once tore open presents in that living room. Grandparents once laughed, cooked, and told stories in that kitchen.
A quiet Friday evening that should have been ordinary. The kind of night where the city hums with the calm before the weekend rush. Christmas lights were already glimmering in shop windows. The air had that cool winter crisp. And in a small strip mall on West Anderson Lane, a little yogurt shop was closing for the night. Inside that shop, I can't believe it's yogurt, 4 teenage girls were finishing up their shifts. Jennifer Harbison, 17, was the confident one. The kind of girl who could make customers laugh while counting change. Her sister Sarah, only 15, was helping out that night, eager to earn some pocket money and spend time with her big sister. Alongside them was Eliza Thomas, 17, a quiet, kind-hearted girl who loved animals and was already dreaming of becoming a vet. And finally, Amy Ayers, the youngest at just 13, who'd tagged along for fun to hang out with her friends before heading home. 4 ordinary girls. 4 bright lives. None of them knew that within the next few hours, their names would be written into one of the most haunting crime stories in Texas history. It was a little after 11 p.m. when the last few customers left. The closed sign flipped, and the lights dimmed inside. Witnesses later recalled seeing the girls cleaning the counters, chatting and giggling as the minutes ticked toward midnight. Nothing unusual, nothing suspicious. But outside, in the parking lot, something else was happening, something they couldn't see. A white car was spotted briefly idling near the shop. A group of young men was seen hanging around the area earlier that night. But no one thought much of it. After all, Austin wasn't the kind of place people locked their doors out of fear. Not yet. Just before midnight, firefighters responded to a call. Flames were shooting through the roof of a small yogurt shop. Smoke poured into the night sky, lighting the parking lot with an eerie orange glow. At first, it seemed like a freak accident, a kitchen fire maybe. But when they broke down the back door, what they found stopped them cold. 4 bodies, stacked and bound, naked, burned beyond recognition. The fire had been set intentionally. Gasoline had been poured across the floor and lit. But the fire hadn't just been to destroy the shop. It was meant to destroy the truth. When investigators first walked in, they didn't even realize there were 4 victims. The damage was that severe. The scene was chaos. Ash, melted plastic, the smell of smoke, and something far worse. But beneath that horror, detectives began to see the outlines of a deliberate act. The girls had been bound with their own clothing. They'd been shot in the head, and at least one had been sexually assaulted. Austin woke up to headlines that made the entire city stop. 4 teenage girls murdered in a yogurt shop fire? It was a crime so senseless, so brutal, that it shattered the illusion of safety people once felt. Parents clutched their children tighter, teenagers looked over their shoulders. No one could understand how something like this could happen, or why. The police immediately launched one of the largest investigations in Austin's history. Dozens of detectives were assigned. Hundreds of tips poured in. Yet the crime scene itself offered little to go on. The fire had done its job. Evidence was scarce, fingerprints melted, DNA destroyed. Still, investigators believed this wasn't random. Whoever had done it had spent time in that shop. They'd waited until closing. They knew how to get in, how to control the girls, and how to leave behind a nightmare. In the days that followed, interviews swept through the city. Anyone who'd been near the yogurt shop that night was questioned, from customers to delivery drivers. Witnesses remembered small details. a group of young men lawyering, a strange car, a loud bang just before midnight. But none of it led anywhere solid. For weeks, the police tried to piece together a timeline. They believed the murders occurred between 11 p.m. and midnight. The girls had been closing up, counting the till. Maybe they opened the door for someone they knew, or maybe someone forced their way in. There were signs of struggle, but also signs of control. Whoever did this took their time. As the media descended on Austin, the story became national. Reporters called it the worst crime Austin has ever seen. News vans lined the street, their cameras capturing the burned remains of the little yogurt shop, now a symbol of something unthinkable. For the victims' families, grief turned quickly into frustration. Weeks turned into months. Leads turned into dead ends. Every time detectives thought they had a suspect, evidence crumbled, and the killer, or killers, seemed to have vanished without a trace. By early 1992, the investigation was losing momentum. The public grew restless. People wanted answers. Anyone to blame. That's when rumors began to fill the silence. Teenagers who hung out near the shop. Boys who bragged about knowing something. One name led to another, and soon the case took a sharp turn. 4 young men, Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, Maurice Pierce, and Forrest Wellborn, all teenagers at the time of the murders, were suddenly under suspicion. Maurice Pierce, just 16, was first picked up by police months after the murders for carrying a .22 caliber handgun in a mall. When asked where he got it, he told officers it was like the one used in the yogurt shop murders. That offhand comment was enough to pull all 4 into the storm. Detectives pushed hard. Hours of interrogation followed, without lawyers, without parents. The teens denied involvement at first. Then, under pressure, confessions began to surface. But something was wrong. Each version of the story changed. Details didn't match the crime scene. And, crucially, there was no physical evidence tying them to the murders. Still, the city wanted justice. In 1999, nearly 8 years after the murders, Springsteen and Scott were both convicted, largely on their confessions, despite the lack of DNA proof. Each was sentenced to death. Austin finally exhaled. The case was closed. But beneath that relief, cracks were already forming. As years passed, appeals dragged on. Defense lawyers argued that the confessions were coerced, that detectives had fed details to the suspects, details only the killers could know, or details that had already been leaked to the media. Then in 2008, new DNA testing changed everything. The biological evidence recovered from the scene didn't match any of the 4 men convicted. It belonged to someone else, an unknown male. The entire case unraveled. Convictions were overturned. Charges dropped. After nearly 2 decades, the so-called killers were free. And once again, the city of Austin was left with nothing but questions. Who killed those 4 girls? Why? And where is that unknown man? The one whose DNA still whispers from the ashes of that yogurt shop. As the years have passed, new investigators have revisited the case again and again. Technology keeps evolving. Hope flickers every time new DNA techniques emerge. But so far, the killer has remained in the shadows, a ghost tied to a single burning night in 1991. For the families of Jennifer, Sarah, Eliza, and Amy, there has never been closure. Every anniversary brings the same ache, the same question that has haunted Austin for over 3 decades. How can 4 innocent girls vanish into smoke and justice vanish with them? The shock of the murders had paralyzed Austin. But time is a strange thing. It dulls the noise while deepening the silence. By the spring of 1992, the yogurt shop had been torn down, leaving only a patch of scorched concrete and memories that refused to fade. Yet, behind closed doors, detectives still sifted through endless stacks of reports, witness statements, and dead leads. Everyone involved in law enforcement at that time admits one thing today. The pressure was crushing. Parents were terrified, the media relentless, and politicians impatient. Austin had grown from a college town into a sprawling city, and the thought that a killer might be wandering its neighborhoods kept the entire community on edge. The city wanted an answer, any answer. Detectives went back to the beginning, retracing every witness statement, re-interviewing anyone who had ever stepped inside that yogurt shop. But as months turned into years, nothing seemed to fit. The case files became thicker, but the path forward only more confusing. It was as if the murderer had vanished into thin air. That's when the tip came in, the one that would change everything. In 1996, 5 years after the crime, a patrol officer stopped a teenage boy at a shopping mall. The boy's name was Maurice Pierce, 16 years old, baby-faced, nervous. In his waistband, officers found a small .22 caliber pistol. When they asked where he'd gotten it, Pierce said it was the same type of gun used in the yogurt shop murders. A careless comment? Or something more? Within days, homicide detectives brought him in for questioning. What began as casual conversation quickly turned into a marathon interrogation. Pierce told them about 3 friends, Robert Springsteen, Michael Scott, and Forrest Wellborn, all young men he'd grown up with. He said they used to hang around that part of town. They'd talked about robbing the yogurt shop once, he claimed, just to get some easy cash. Detectives felt their pulse quicken. After years of frustration, maybe this was it. Maybe this was the thread they'd been waiting for. But, as every investigator knows, desperation is dangerous. It can turn possibilities into conclusions, and suspicion into certainty. The police pulled in the other 3 boys. One by one, they were questioned. All denied involvement. All said Maurice was lying. Yet the longer they were kept in those small gray rooms, the more the story began to twist. Hours passed, voices rose, details were suggested, and fear began to shape confessions. Robert Springsteen eventually broke. After nearly 20 hours of questioning, exhausted and frightened, he told detectives he'd been inside the yogurt shop that night. He said they planned to rob the place, that something went wrong, and that the girls were killed to eliminate witnesses. It was the confession Austin had been waiting for. Soon after, Robert Springsteen confessed too, his story eerily similar. But something didn't add up. The details in each confession didn't perfectly match. Who tied up which girl? Who set the fire? How many shots were fired? Still, after so many years, those discrepancies were overlooked. The detectives believed they had their killers. In 1999, 8 years after the murders, both Scott and Springsteen were charged and convicted. Maurice Pierce and Forrest Wellborn, meanwhile, saw their cases quietly collapse due to lack of evidence. But in the eyes of Austin, justice had finally been served. For a while, the city slept easier. Newspapers ran headlines of relief, justice for the yogurt shop girls. The families, though still broken, tried to accept that the nightmare was finally over. But deep down, some detectives weren't convinced. Even during the trials, there were moments that didn't sit right. For one, there was no physical evidence tying any of the young men to the crime scene. Not a fingerprint, not a single fiber. The confessions were all they had. And those confessions, when examined closely, seemed rehearsed. Pieces that fit only because detectives had forced them into place. Years later, one of the interrogators would admit that many of the key details came from police themselves. "We said them the information," he said, "because they kept getting it wrong." And then there was the DNA. By 2001, technology had advanced enough to retest the biological samples from the crime scene. When the results came back, investigators expected confirmation, a match to one of the men behind bars. Instead, what they found was unexplainable. The DNA did not belong to Springsteen. It did not belong to Scott. It did not belong to Pierce. It did not belong to Wellborn. It belonged to someone else entirely, an unidentified male. That discovery changed everything. Suddenly, the foundations of the entire case crumbled. If neither of the convicted men had left that DNA, then who did? And if the confessions were true, how could that be possible? The defense attorneys pounced. They argued that the interrogations had been psychological warfare, that detectives had coerced false confessions from frightened young men desperate to say anything to make it stop. After nearly a decade in prison, Robert Springsteen's conviction was overturned in 2006. Michael Scott's followed 2 years later. Both men were freed in 2009, and Austin once again found itself back where it started. No suspects, no answers, just ghosts. The reversal shocked the city. Reporters who had once celebrated the arrests now questioned everything. Talk shows debated whether Austin police had sacrificed truth for closure. And for the families of the victims, the pain reopened like a fresh wound. Jennifer and Sarah Harbison's mother, Barbara Ayers, said it best in an interview years later. "They gave me hope, and then they took it away, all over again." But amid the heartbreak, there was still the faintest glimmer of hope. The DNA, that single microscopic clue that didn't match anyone in the database yet. As technology advanced, the Austin Police Department began working with new forensic labs. Every few years, they'd rerun the samples hoping for a match. In 2017, they sent it through the FBI's national database once again. Nothing. In 2023, they tried emerging genealogical tracking techniques, hoping a distant relative might appear. Still nothing. The man's identity remained locked in mystery. Meanwhile, the former suspects tried to rebuild their lives. But how do you live after being labeled a murderer in one of the most infamous cases in Texas? Springsteen described it years later as being freed from one prison only to walk into another. Everywhere he went, people recognized his face. Maurice Pierce, who had first drawn attention to the group with that stray comment, never found peace. In 2010, during a traffic stop, he pulled a knife on a police officer. The officer fired. Maurice Pierce died on the street, only 33 years old. The tragedy had claimed yet another life. Today, more than 3 decades later, the yogurt shop site remains an empty space. No building, no memorial sign, just the weight of memory. Locals who drive past still lower their voices when they speak about it. For the detectives who once believed they'd solved the case, it's a haunting reminder of how truth can slip through your fingers. And for the victims' families, the wound has never healed. Each anniversary brings new interviews, new theories, new promises that this time technology will solve it. But as the years roll by, the silence grows heavier. And somewhere, perhaps walking unnoticed through a grocery store or living quietly in another city, the man whose DNA ties him to that night may still exist. Unnamed, unknown. By the time the 2010s arrived, the yogurt shop murders had become something larger than a local tragedy. It was no longer just Austin's nightmare. It had become a national obsession, a dark piece of American true crime history. Journalists revisited it every few years. Documentaries aired, podcasts dissected every inconsistency, and amateur sleuths online built theories thread by thread. Everyone wanted to be the one to solve the case. But the deeper people looked, the more it seemed to resist resolution. The detectives who had once led the investigation were now retired, older, reflective.
They'd sit for interviews and talk about how this case had changed their lives. Some admitted mistakes, others defended their decisions, but all shared the same quiet pain, that after decades, 4 young girls still had no justice. The case had left scars on Austin, too. Parents who raised their children in the city after 1991 grew up warning them in whispers, "Don't stay out late. Never open the door for anyone. Call me when you're on your way home." The yogurt shop murders had stolen more than 4 lives. They'd stolen a sense of innocence. But while time blurred most memories, one thing didn't fade: that strand of DNA. In 2008, when the evidence was re-examined, technology had already evolved beyond anything investigators in the 1990s could have imagined. Labs could now detect profiles from the tiniest samples, from skin cells barely visible to the naked eye. The DNA from the crime scene, recovered from one of the victims' bodies, was clean, untainted, and unmistakable. It belonged to a man. But who? The CODIS database, the FBI's national system, returned no match. That meant the man had never been arrested or convicted of a crime serious enough to require a DNA submission. It was both a relief and a curse. Relief because it ruled out the wrongfully accused. Curse because it meant the real killer was still out there, possibly living quietly somewhere, hidden in plain sight. For years, the Austin Police Department held onto that DNA as their greatest hope. They had nothing else. No fingerprints, no reliable eyewitnesses, no murder weapon, just that single genetic clue. And then came forensic genealogy, the breakthrough that changed the face of cold cases everywhere.
When the Golden State Killer was captured in 2018 using DNA from a genealogy website, it opened a new era in criminal investigations. Suddenly, cases once thought unsolvable were being cracked open using family trees and ancestry databases. Investigators could trace distant relatives of a suspect and narrow down a list of possible identities through careful deduction. In 2019, the Austin police quietly began exploring whether the yogurt shop case could benefit from this same technology. Samples were resent to advanced labs, experts in genealogical tracing were consulted. For a moment, hope returned. The families were told to be patient. Something might finally break. But the results came back with an all-too-familiar echo. Nothing. The DNA sample was too degraded, too limited for the complex genealogical mapping needed. It wasn't useless, but it wasn't enough to build a family tree. It was like holding a torn photograph, a face you could almost see, but not quite make out. Still, detectives refused to give up. One former cold case investigator described the file as a living thing. Every few years, it was reopened, re-examined, and re-energized with new possibilities. Every new forensic advancement reignited the same question: could this finally be the one that ends the mystery? For the victims' families, hope was a double-edged sword. Each new wave of technology brought a fresh burst of anticipation, followed by the crushing silence of disappointment. Jennifer and Sarah Harbison's father once said, "I've learned to live with the grief. What I can't live with is the not knowing." Even decades later, the details still haunt. The girls had been bound with their own clothes. The fire was deliberate, set to erase evidence, but it didn't erase everything. Investigators believe at least 2 people were involved, one person to control the victims, another to set the fire. But who were they? Every few years, rumors would surge through Austin. Someone claimed to have heard a confession in a bar. Another said an old boyfriend of one of the girls had moved away under suspicious circumstances. A drifter supposedly bragged about killing those yogurt shop girls. Police chased each tip, each whisper, only to find the same dead ends. It was like chasing shadows. Always close, never solid.
The yogurt shop murders also became a case study for students of criminology. Professors used it to teach the dangers of tunnel vision, the fragility of confessions, and the ethical limits of interrogation. It was a story of tragedy compounded by human error, how desperation to close a case can sometimes destroy the very truth it seeks. But the story wasn't just about failure. It was also about endurance, the relentless pursuit of justice, long after the cameras stopped rolling. Detective Chris Ayers, who joined the Austin Cold Case Unit in the late 2010s, wasn't even alive when the murders happened. But the case haunted him from the moment he saw the files, the photographs, the burned register, the charred remnants of 4 teenage lives. He once said, "It's like they're still waiting for someone to tell their story right. Not the story of the trial, not the media circus, the story of what really happened in that shop." That's what drives the new generation of investigators, the desire to separate myth from truth.
One of the more haunting theories that emerged over the years involved a possible connection to a larger string of crimes, robberies and assaults in the Austin area around the same time. Some of the same details matched: victims bound, fires set to destroy evidence, similar calibers used. It was speculation, yes, but it raised the chilling possibility that the yogurt shop murders weren't a one-time explosion of violence, but part of a pattern that investigators never fully recognized. Another theory was far simpler, and perhaps more terrifying, that it was just random. A robbery gone wrong. 4 girls in the wrong place at the wrong time, confronted by men who panicked, then chose the most brutal way imaginable to cover their tracks. What makes the yogurt shop murders so haunting isn't just the horror of what happened. It's that there's no clear motive, no satisfying explanation. The senselessness is the monster that lives on. And yet, despite the years, there's always the feeling that someone, somewhere, knows. Someone who was told something once, a long time ago. Someone who's carried a secret all this time. Secrets have weight, and they have a way of surfacing. In 2021, the Austin Police Department announced that they were again reviewing all the evidence with new software capable of analyzing trace materials once thought unusable. They didn't promise results, but they promised effort. And for the families, that meant everything. Because hope, even after 30 years, is still hope. Each December, people gather at the site of the old yogurt shop. They light candles, leave flowers, whisper prayers. The faces of the girls, Jennifer, Sarah, Eliza, and Amy, smile back from framed photographs. Bright eyes, youthful laughter, frozen in time. The crowd stands quietly as the wind moves through the empty lot, carrying the sound of memory. For those who still remember that night, the scene never fades. The glow of the flames against the cold winter air, the sirens, the faces of firefighters realizing what they had found. For those families, that moment is always there, an open wound in the timeline of Austin. 34 years later, the case remains officially unsolved. The FBI and the Texas Rangers have both assisted, yet no one has ever been convicted beyond a doubt. No one has confessed credibly. The DNA remains unmatched. But something about this story refuses to die. Maybe it's because it represents every parent's worst fear. Maybe because those 4 girls were so young, so ordinary, so undeserving of such brutality. Or maybe it's because the story of the yogurt shop murders reminds us that evil often hides behind the most ordinary nights, that monsters don't always look like monsters until it's too late. The city of Austin has changed beyond recognition since 1991. New skyscrapers rise where old shops once stood. The skyline glows brighter now. The streets buzz with life, and a generation has grown up hearing about the yogurt shop murders only as a cautionary story, a dark echo of the past. But for those who lived through it, for the families who lost everything that night, time doesn't erase pain. It only teaches you how to carry it. Every December, as winter settles in and Christmas lights start to twinkle around the city,
the memories return. People still remember exactly where they were when they first heard the news. They remember the smell of smoke in the air that night, the way the TV anchors' voices trembled as they spoke of 4 young girls and a horrific discovery. Those 4 names have never left Austin's collective memory: Jennifer Harbison, Sarah Harbison, Eliza Thomas, and Amy Ayers.
4 girls whose laughter once filled a small yogurt shop on Anderson Lane. 4 souls whose story became a symbol of innocence lost. The families, each in their own way, have found paths through the endless ache. Jennifer and Sarah's mother, Barbara, still speaks about them as if they might walk through the door any minute. She says she can't forget their smiles, their energy, their plans. Sarah wanted to be a veterinarian, she once said softly. Jennifer was going to college. They were just girls, just living. For Amy Ayers' family, the pain took another shape. Amy was only 13, a child. Her parents never stopped asking, why her? Why was she even there that night? She wasn't supposed to be. She just wanted to spend a little more time with her friends before heading home. That one innocent choice, to stay a few more minutes, became the cruel twist that decided her fate. And Eliza Thomas's loved ones describe her as the quiet one, the kind soul who loved animals and never liked conflict. Her father once said in a rare interview, "It doesn't get easier. You just get used to waking up with a hole where your child should be." For decades, they've waited for the phone call, the one that would finally say, "We found him." But that call has never come. What makes the yogurt shop murders endure isn't just the brutality, it's the emptiness that follows, the unanswered questions that linger in every heart touched by the story. Who walked into that shop that night? What words were spoken in those final moments? And how does someone commit something so monstrous, then vanish without a trace? The mystery has generated countless theories. Some believe it was a planned robbery, a group of men who intended only to steal, not to kill, until something went terribly wrong. Others think it was personal, that someone knew one of the girls, that revenge or obsession drove the violence. There's even a darker possibility whispered in law enforcement circles, that it was the work of drifters passing through Austin, men who had killed before and would kill again, leaving behind only chaos. Whatever the truth, the effect has been devastatingly human. One of the original detectives, now in his 70s, once said he still dreams about that night. He said, "You never forget something like that. You can retire, you can move away, but part of you is still standing in that burned-out shop hearing the sirens." And perhaps that's what makes this case so haunting. It refuses to let go. It clings to the conscience of anyone who touches it. Even new detectives who join the Austin Police Department's Cold Case Division describe feeling a strange pull when they first see the file. The photographs, the charred remains of the register, the evidence bags labeled yogurt shop. It's as if the case itself demands to be solved, as if those 4 girls are still waiting, silently, for someone to find the missing piece. In 2024, whispers began again, that new DNA sequencing technology might finally be able to extract a full profile from the existing sample. The kind of testing that can rebuild an entire genetic picture from trace material once thought unusable. It was hope reborn, fragile but real. The families were contacted, samples were prepared. Scientists promised nothing, but they promised to try.
As of this year, results are still pending, but for the first time in decades, optimism feels tangible again. The detectives say that if the DNA can finally be mapped through genealogical databases, it might connect to a distant relative, a cousin, an uncle, someone who can lead them to the man who walked into that shop in 1991 and changed everything. Until then, the city waits. The lot where the yogurt shop once stood remains empty. Grass and gravel now cover the ground where the horror unfolded. Some say that's fitting. Others say it's wrong that there's no permanent memorial. But those who remember know.
the memorial isn't just the place. It's the story. Every time someone tells it, every time a new documentary, a podcast, a conversation reopens the case, it's another small act of remembrance and resistance against forgetting. Because forgetting would mean letting the killer win. Over the years, this case has also forced America to confront uncomfortable truths about its justice system. It's a story not just of murder, but of what happens when desperation to find closure leads to the wrong answers. The confessions of Michael Scott and Robert Springsteen, now widely regarded as false, became lessons taught in law schools and police academies. Students study the transcripts and realize how easily fear, exhaustion, and suggestion can twist a person's words. In one of his last interviews, Springsteen said, "They took my life for 10 years. And the worst part is, the real killer was still free." It's a chilling reminder that justice rushed is justice denied. And yet, for all its tragedy, the yogurt shop murders also represent something else: persistence. A refusal to give up. Through the pain, the doubt, the false starts, and shattered hopes, there's a quiet courage in the families, the detectives, the journalists, and even the ordinary citizens who refuse to let the story die. Austin has changed, yes, but when you talk to the people who still live near Anderson Lane, there's a reverence in the way they speak about it, as if they're talking about a sacred place, a place where something terrible happened, but where the truth still lingers. Waiting. At night, when the city quiets and the air cools, you can still feel it. The weight of what was lost, the echoes of laughter that once filled that small shop. It's said that time heals all wounds, but some wounds aren't meant to heal. Some are meant to remind us of what happens when darkness is ignored, when innocence meets evil, and when justice, no matter how late, must still be pursued. The story of the yogurt shop murders is more than a crime story now. It's a legend of unanswered questions, a testament to how fragile truth can be and how fiercely people will fight to find it. 4 young girls went to work one December night. They never came home. 34 years later, their story is still being told. And maybe, just maybe, that's how the truth will finally emerge. Because stories have power. And this one refuses to die.
The shadows of that night still stretch across Austin. 4 young lives taken, one cold December evening, and a question that refuses to fade. Who did it, and why? Even after all these years, the search for truth continues. And as long as people remember their names, Jennifer, Sarah, Eliza, and Amy, their story will never be forgotten. Because justice doesn't end with time. It waits, quietly, for the moment someone finally listens close enough to hear the truth. Thank you for watching this story with us, for keeping their memory alive. If this case moved you, if you believe their story deserves to be heard, please like, share, and subscribe to Case Thread Crime. Every share helps bring attention to the unsolved. Every comment keeps the conversation alive. And every new subscriber becomes part of our mission to uncover the truth, one case at a time. Because here on Case Thread Crime, we don't just tell stories, we give them a voice. Until next time, stay curious, stay aware, and never stop seeking the truth.